In summary of my talk today, I'm going to share some of my experiences of living with mental distress. So instead of calling it mental illness, we call it mental distress, which is a more inclusive word, because I can imagine that most people in the audience today would have suffered mental distress at some point in time. So whether it's a diagnosed condition or little ups and downs in the road. I'll also be talking about my current work at St Vincent's, and I'll finish up with ways that other people can help to support people who have mental distress. So I had a fairly typical childhood, if you can see the photos. I was an adventurous child. I was out on the beach up in Surfers Paradise. I studied at university. I tried new things, permed the hair. You can see some bad perms there. I lived on campus at university. That's the one in the hippie outfit there. And I also tried new things. I went caving with the bushwalking club. So I had a fairly typical childhood on the surface. But behind closed doors, there were elements of domestic violence. There were financial difficulties. And there was a whole lot of instability and disharmony in the family. But I knuckled down and went well at school, studied at university, and then unexpectedly became a mother when I was 22. And so when I was 22, I ended up getting postnatal depression, not long after my daughter's birth. And I spent a couple of weeks at a mother-baby unit at the Mercy Hospital for Women. But it wasn't until I was 38 that I was actually admitted to a mental health unit, what you used to call a psychiatric unit, because I was quite a fighter, so I kept on keeping on. So my first night on the psychiatric unit was quite a big shock. I was in a crisis situation, and it was made worse by the environment there on the unit, which I have to mention wasn't St Vincent's Hospital. It was another unit in Melbourne. I felt very unsafe. I was locked in. The staff seemed quite jaded and cold. I had to share a room with another patient on the unit. The staff, meanwhile, were locked away in the nurses' station. It was quite dirty on the unit. There were broken locks on toilet doors, things like that. And I got very distressed, could almost say hysterical. And when I said that I was a voluntary patient and that I'd like to leave, I was threatened with a treatment order by the psychiatrist on the unit. So then I managed to eventually calm myself down a bit and tried to adapt to the conditions there on the unit. So I arrived there with nothing. I was wearing flannelette pyjamas, had bare feet, and had very little in the way of belongings. And when I arrived on the unit, one of the other patients started singing Bananas in Pyjamas. So I didn't know that there was a dress code for being on a psychiatric unit, but everyone else seemed to be wearing street clothes. So I was there in the flannelette pyjamas. So kind of like this lady who's gone shopping and everyone's laughing in the background. What I received the next morning, I asked if I could have a towel and some soap and have a shower. So I got a piece of soap about this big, and I got a towel. I asked about shampoo and conditioner. There was none available. I asked about deodorant. There was none available. So I had a shower, and with this tiny piece of soap, I washed my hair, washed the body. They did rustle up some very cheap hand cream, just one little bottle about this big, and I put that on as deodorant. So despite all my life experiences, being a mother, a daughter, a university student, working for about 10 years as a radiographer. None of that seemed to matter. Suddenly I was a person who was locked up without any rights, in pretty terrible conditions. And my behaviour when I got distressed about being there was just seen as a symptom of my mental illness. So I was called attention-seeking and histrionic and all these other terms. So, yeah, it was quite a shock to the system. So even after the shower with that little piece of soap, I still had no shoes. And as I said, the conditions on the unit were quite unsavoury. And I remember sitting on my bed in my room with my feet hanging over the edge, and in my mind I just had to abandon my feet. I just had to pretend that they weren't part of my body anymore, because I was stepping in different things around the unit and in the toilets. So I just had to disregard them and put them out of my mind so that I could cope with the situation. And what sort of activities did we have on mental health units 10 years ago? Nothing much. So I was walking up and down the corridors. There were people passed out on couches. There was one TV room. People would be sleeping a lot or watching TV or just walking around. And I'd look at the notice boards to try to find some activity, but it seemed like the volunteers that came in to do the activities had moved on and there was nothing left available. So it just left me wondering how people were supposed to get well just being locked up in a unit like that and given some medication. And so after a week, I got to leave. So I behaved myself, did what they wanted, talked to the psychiatrist every other day, and I got to go home. And I was told to go to see my GP and get a script for some more medication. So that's the GP there. I don't know if any of you have experienced talking to GPs about mental illness, but some of them don't know a whole lot. I was told that the CAT team would visit once while I was at home, so that's the crisis assessment team, came to my house and just checked how I was settling back in. And I asked one of the nurses if there were any support groups that I could go to in the community. And he gave me just a scrap of paper and he'd scribbled a few words and said, try Googling these at home. And I did try Googling them and I didn't find anything in my area and anything that was at a suitable time because I had to go back to work to support my two daughters. So I was discharged on the Friday and on Monday I went back to work. So I went back home and I have to say within 28 days I was readmitted to a different psychiatric unit that was slightly cleaner. But it just goes to show that there was a problem with support when you leave the unit because so many people do get readmitted. So what did I do? I wanted to make it better for people that came into the unit after me. So what I did for the next year was I went out and out of my own pocket I bought different items to make up care packs. So I'd make up 10 care packs at a time and I'd put in toiletries, shampoo, conditioner, toothpaste, a brush and a comb. I bought new underwear, bras for the ladies, some sort of footwear, new footwear, and yeah, I put it all together in a pack and I just turned up on the doorstep of the mental health unit every month or so and presented them with a big box of these care packs. So I was very concerned about my experience and that other people would be going through it as well. And I did discover once I settled down on the unit that there were great people in there. So once I got over my initial prejudices and fears, I discovered that there were really honest people in there with stories to be told, and there were lots of survivors. So I felt a real connection with them, even though I'd headed back home. That's just a list of all the things that I put in the care packs. And then 8 years passed. So I was back at work after my second stay in hospital, and I was trying to hold myself together. It was like, don't get sick again, Donna, because you don't want to go back there. One particular issue that I had is there's mixed sex units in mental health these days. In the old days, they used to have a men's unit and a women's unit, but it's been the practice in the last 50 years or so that men and women are together. And for women on the unit, it can be quite a threatening place. People can be disinhibited, people can be vulnerable, and sometimes coercions are put upon the women on the unit. So yeah, I was doing my very best to hold myself together because I didn't ever want to go back there as a patient. And as the 8 years passed, unbeknownst to me, there was something new that was happening in mental health. So instead of your recovery being all about your clinical treatment, they brought more people into the puzzle of recovery. So the consumer or the patient had a voice. They had a choice with treatments, treatment options. The family was included, and they also brought in peer workers. So peer workers are people who have a lived experience of mental health issues. I call it a living experience, because lived experience makes it sound like it's in the past, but it's something that we live every day. So rather than it just being clinically orientated, it's now recognised that family, other people who've been through a similar situation, the consumer, are all very important parts of recovery. And recovery in mental health doesn't mean not having any symptoms. Recovery means living a meaningful life and having strategies to deal with whatever symptoms that you might still have, despite medication and other things. So the benefits of peer support. Studies have shown that peer support can benefit consumers or patients in many ways. It can help to increase self-esteem because they realise that they're not alone and that they have achieved lots of things in life despite their mental distress. It improves their decision-making skills. It helps them to make social connections. It can also decrease psychiatric symptoms and the length of the hospital stay. It decreases isolation, and it can also help consumers pursue educational and employment goals. And isolation is a very big part of mental distress, particularly if your mental distress occurs when you're like a teenager, when you're forming your identity. So for some people, their identity becomes the mental illness, and part of peer support is helping people to understand that they're not their mental illness, that they've got all these other qualities, and mental distress is just a small part of it. So back to my time on the unit, I've been very, very bored. What had happened in the 8 years? So at St Vincent's we have a robust group program with over 20 activities on every week. Some of the activities are practical life skills. So we have cooking groups, We have outings to Vic Market to buy ingredients to cook with. We have walks in the park. We go to coffee shops. There's also other activities that are to do with self-care, self-soothing, so that the consumers learn how to take care of themselves and to take control of their lives. And there's also different therapy activities, different talking groups and writing groups. So a couple of years ago, or actually a year and a half ago, I saw an ad online about this new program that was starting up, and it's called, unfortunately, the Expanding Post-Discharge Support Program. It's a mouthful. So what it is a special program where consumers are supported by peer workers for 28 days after their discharge from the mental health unit. And the aim is, because it's about money for the government, is to reduce the 28-day readmission rate. But part of our brief is to help establish a community connection for each consumer, because as I said, isolation is a very big problem. So we try to explore with different consumers what they're interested in. It might be a social group, some sort of a short course, an activity group. It might be going back to study. It might be looking for work. So community connection is essential to recovery. So instead of my experience when I was discharged from the unit, we have these days the 3 peer support workers at St Vincent's Hospital who provide post-discharge support. So there's myself and Liam Buckley and Laura Anstey. So we tried to get a nice balance of males and females, youth and middle age. So each peer worker establishes a connection with inpatients on the unit. We try to be supporting 4 people while they're on the unit and getting to know each other. And then at the same time supporting 4 consumers who are out in the community after they've been discharged. And we try to make face-to-face contact in the community 3 times with each consumer over the 28-day period. But I have to say 28 days isn't that long, and that's part of why I'm here today. People need more support than that, more social connection than just 28 days. So at the end of the talk, I'll let you know about some other volunteer work that's available. So intentional peer support, that's the model that we work under. Intentional means that we have a relationship with a specific purpose in mind, and we try to communicate in ways to help both people, the peer worker and the consumer, to step outside their current story and worldview. So for example, some people who've been in and out of mental health units a lot can end up being the patient, being the person who is helped all the time, and they lose their choice and their power. So this relationship is an equal relationship, hence the word peer. So we try to be as equal as we can with the consumers, and we try to break that pattern of being the victim or always being helped, and try to empower people to take control of their lives and do things that will inspire them. And the last word, there's support, which is validation. So we give praise where praise is due. Sometimes people don't get much positive feedback. We encourage each other. It's a mutual relationship. It's give and take. And I actually forgot to get it out of my bag, but I brought along a little example of a small gift that one of the consumers gave me. It's okay, I'll describe it. It was a little plastic cover like off a new mobile phone, you know how they have that on the screen and you peel it off. And this consumer, David, gave me this little piece of plastic and he said, "This is your ticket to anywhere." So I popped it in my handbag in with my Mikey card, and for the next 3 months, every time I took out the Mikey card, I had this piece of plastic stuck to it, and I thought, my ticket to anywhere. So it's a harsh place to be working at an acute unit, particularly for myself, having traumatic experiences in units before. So yeah, some days it's hard to get into work, 4 days a week at the acute unit, but I often get things back from the consumers. They can pick me up too, so it's a mutual relationship. Intentional peer support is also understanding each other through the lens of shared experience, which is that living experience that I spoke of, the living experience of mental distress and other life experiences. So I've been a sole parent and I have supported ladies on the unit who have been sole parents. So whatever life experience you have, you can sort of harness it in your work. And intentional peer support is about forming a relationship that is mutually transformative, supportive and challenging. So that's that in a nutshell. What sort of things do we actually do with the consumers? So we listen a lot. Lots of the time people haven't been heard. So just for them to have a voice about their experiences as a consumer in mental health or other life experiences, it's amazing how much difference is made just having someone sit and listen, particularly on mental health units where the clinical staff can often be running around, doing observations, writing in notes, all the legal paperwork they have. It's great just to have the peer workers there who can just sit and spend some time. So we also advocate for consumers if they have any problems with their treatment. We run peer support groups on the unit. We support any decisions they have to join groups or study or work out in the community. We provide a sense of hope for them, so we share little snippets of our own journeys just to give them strategies on things they could try. Sometimes they give me strategies as well, which is really good. So yeah, it's about sharing little bits and pieces of your own story, which the clinical workers don't do. What we don't do is all those practical sort of things, like arranging housing or buying clothes or doing banking, making decisions for consumers, taking them for appointments. And the reason that we don't do those things is we don't want it to be a helper-helpee relationship. It's all about empowerment. So if we've established a relationship and a connection with the consumer, sure, we could go along with them while they buy some clothes, but the point of the outing wouldn't be actually buying the clothes. It's that peer connection and supporting each other and sharing different strategies. So for example, one lady on the unit last year was a young pregnant lady, and she was on the unit for many months, maybe 4 or 5 months, and I went out with her because she needed to buy some maternity clothes and some things for the baby. And the reason I did that with her was because we already had a strong connection. This is one of the groups that I run on the unit. Might be a little bit hard to see. The topic for this group is, where do you see yourself? And I've just put lots of different images of different activities and relationships that people might have out in the community. And I put little quotes in. So we've got the Beatles there, all you need is love. And if you go to the next one there, a few more quotes. You can't organise recovery around a vacuum. So everyone needs to have some sort of a purpose in life. either big or small. So it's about discovering what that purpose is so that the person can travel on their recovery journey. And there's a quote from Mahatma Gandhi, which I can't read because I haven't got my glasses on. But yeah, it's the peer support groups that I run. It's a sharing space, it's a safe space. I don't go and report things back to the clinical team. It's confidential unless the consumer indicates that they're thinking of self-harming or harming other people. Besides that, it's a safe, confidential place. And then we attempt, once they're back out in the community, to see what their interests, hopes and goals are. And if they're ready, assisting them to make community connections and to form relationships in the community. So it's no good going in with an agenda, your own agenda of what you think you should achieve with someone. It's driven by the consumer, and it's only if they're ready to make that connection. And sometimes people are struggling with very basic things like food, bills and housing. So you can't move on to more loftier ideals if you're struggling with the basics. So that's just a list there of the sort of things that we might refer consumers to. The food, bills and housing, we would refer them to the social workers, get the social worker to come and see them because there is funding available to assist them for those sorts of things. Okay, so a consumer connection, just an example of someone that I was supporting, and this is the chap David that I spoke about with the ticket to anywhere. So on the unit I found David to be very warm and talkative and generous. I never talk about people in psychiatric terms. When I write in their notes, their clinical notes on the unit, I try to give like a really human perspective to the person rather than just describing symptoms. David is very knowledgeable about a whole range of things. History, botany, geography, politics. He came to 5 different groups of mine on the unit, but he was quite socially isolated and had a lack of community support. So he was at risk of readmission and a long stay on the unit. So he was interested in meeting up with me, and that's what we did. 8 catch-ups in the community over a 4-month period. So I don't know if you noticed, we're only supposed to support them for 28 days, but Donna can't count. So I'm actually catching up with David this Friday. Yeah, we've just got a really great connection. We just sit and talk about whatever. We just chew the fat. So yeah, we have a great time together, and I haven't quite cut off yet. So yeah, David and I established a connection on the unit, and I also took him out of the unit when he had some leave. He needed to buy some glasses from the chemist, needed to go to the bank. We have a mutual love of books, history and flora. And we have similar worldviews. So despite experiencing childhood trauma, bad relationships and complex family relationships, both David and I believe that the world is a good place with friends in your life. We both have a sense of humour, quite cheeky at times and very inappropriate other times. We share lots of common experiences and strategies that keep us well. And we also support each other with ongoing experiences. So at Christmas time, David was quite stressed about catching up with the family. There's all sorts of complex emotions coming up then. So yeah, that was good to be able to be with him and listen to him at that time. So as part of my role, I have to try to establish this community connection. But for David, I started, his flat is very cluttered. He inherited a lot of furniture and household items when his mother moved into care. And so his flat is just chock-a-block with furniture and different knickknacks. And so I was going to support him trying to clear up his flat, because he said that lots of the items had bad memories and he thought he might become unwell again having these items that had bad memories associated with them. So I did some research online and I found an organisation called Mrs. Second Hand, where she'd come to the house and she'd buy some of the items that David didn't want. And she also had a service called Pack Up Your Troubles, where she'd come and clean up the place as well. So I brought that up with David, but he wasn't comfortable with the idea of having a stranger coming into his flat, and he was worried that she might take things and sell them in her shop and not give him any money for it. So he was a little bit suspicious having a stranger coming in. So I left that alone and just kept meeting up with David. And it became obvious how isolated he was. He told me one day that he saw Greta, his psychiatrist, every Monday. He saw me on the Fridays, and then his mother called him every Saturday at 3 p.m. And that was basically his week. So then I did some digging around online and I found something called PALS Volunteers through Mind Australia, and they're people that for at least a year form a social connection with people who have mental distress and meet up with the consumer in the community, do activities together, golf or go have a coffee, whatever the two of them are interested in. So they're matched with similar interests. So so I asked David about that and he was really interested. And despite the long waiting list to be matched with a volunteer, he was matched within a couple of months, and he's been meeting up with his volunteer every couple of weeks. I think they've met 2 times so far. So the work we do, it's quite complex, but it is powerful. So some quotes that we've had from people who've been through the program are, "I'd like to thank you in person for the friendship and professional way in which you did your job. You not only helped make a very average stay bearable, but you have given me some great food for thought." Another lady said, "Always great to see you. You're like a ray of sunshine and I'm eternally grateful for your help and friendship." Another lady who I was talking to about recovery, because she'd always been told you can't recover from your mental illness, you'll be on medication for life. I lent her a DVD that was about recovery, and it had a couple of stories of people who'd managed to come off their medication when they had the right support in their lives. And she said, "I've been thinking about mental illness in this way for over a decade, but this is the first time I've seen a DVD mirroring my thoughts. There's seemed no hope for years. Thank you." And a couple more. "I'm just really thankful that you would want to support me in this way. It's really very kind of St Vincent's and means a lot. The gesture means more than the actual classes." So in that one you can hear how low her self-esteem is, that she's just so very thankful that someone's there to support her. And the last one, this is from David. "It's great that I can talk to you about anything. So refreshing." So what could you do to support people who have mental distress? I think the first thing is to understand that distress is a spectrum. It's not like no one suffers from distress. Like I said before, I'm sure everyone in this room has suffered from mental distress at some point in time. And it's a whole spectrum from no symptoms to a bit of distress to a diagnosed illness and so forth. So even using the word distress, I think, is quite inclusive. We can all relate to feelings of distress. The other thing is, I got this off Facebook, don't judge someone's life by the chapter you walk in on. So, yeah, we never know what experiences people have had as children, teenagers and adults. So, yeah, it's no good judging someone because who knows where we'd be if we had those same experiences. The other thing is to listen, to hear the voice and hear the life story. It's just so important in such a busy society as we're in these days, just to spend time and sit and listen to someone and really hear their voice and their story. And the last thing is volunteer work. So there are certain programs available in the mental health area for volunteers, and they all involve getting the consumer involved in activities in the community to give them a sense of purpose, a sense of connection, and to increase their self-esteem. Okay, so this is just a quick summary of a program by CoHealth called the Mates and Mentors program, and it links people who are experiencing mental health issues with volunteers on a one-to-one basis to increase their community engagement and enhance their life skills. So the volunteers don't have to have a diagnosed mental illness. There's two prongs to the program. One's to be a mate, where you offer a professional friendship, usually meeting a couple of hours per week or fortnight. And the volunteer and consumer engage in any activity that friends might do together, such as meeting for coffee, going to the movies, art galleries, playing sports, things like that. And the second prong is to be a mentor, where you support a client to achieve a particular goal, and that's 1 to 2 hours per week for an 8-week period. It's things like attending classes, improving computer skills, and building confidence with public transport. And the other program that's quite well known is the Mind Australia's PALS program, and they're crying out for volunteers as well. And it's very similar to CoHealth, where you're matched with a consumer who's got similar interests, and then you choose activities to do together in the community. Thank you. That's the end of my talk.